When a sitting senator looks a top law enforcement official dead in the eye and asks whether her department ignored hundreds of red flags tied to one of the most notorious criminals in modern history, and she refuses to answer, you know something much bigger is hiding beneath the surface. What unfolded inside that Senate hearing wasn't just a tense exchange. It was a moment that pulled back the curtain on how justice really works when power, politics, and dark secrets collide. The room was supposed to feel procedural, routine oversight, questions about budgets, investigations, reports. But within minutes, it turned into a verbal battlefield.
Website that tracks all of our contributions. An intern at the Department of Justice could have checked to see that the allegation, I'll leave it to myself, that I had received campaign contributions from this individual, that was false. And it's not a maybe answer. It's a yes or no. Did I or didn't I? And there's an unimpeachable record that shows that what she said sitting right there was not true. If we are going to care about untruthful statements made by the Department of Justice and the FBI in this committee, let's not have this be yet another area where there are different rules for one party than for the other party. And just by the way, on that very subject, the other thing that the Attorney General did sitting right there was to strip all cover away from the untruthful statements that had been made to this committee by the current FBI director. You all heard him here. He said that he couldn't tell us about his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case, where he first pled the Fifth, then got immunity, and then testified. He couldn't tell us what he testified to, he said, because the Department of Justice had sealed the testimony and because there was a court order barring him from doing that. And he actually identified which judge, the chief judge of the D.C. Federal District Court. Well, guess what? We know that since then, the chief judge of the Federal District Court has said that that was not true. He said specifically nothing prevented Director Patel from discussing his grand jury testimony. And yesterday, the Attorney General had the chance to say, you're right. We did seal the testimony in that matter. The Department of Justice did seal the testimony, and Patel's statement was true. Not about the court order, but at least it was sealed by the Department of Justice. She didn't say that. So now both his testimony that the DOJ had sealed his testimony and his testimony there was a court order barring his testimony are kind of demonstrably false statements to this committee. And then when he came back and we challenged him on those false statements, his second false statement was to say, I'm not going to answer any of those questions because my transcript of the grand jury testimony, I've worked with the DOJ to see that it is publicly released. Well, it either has been publicly released or it hasn't. It's a very simple distinction, yes or no. And we all know that it has not, in fact, been publicly released. And when we asked about that from the Attorney General, again, she left him high and dry and refused to say that anything had been publicly released, that there was any publicly released transcript. So yesterday stands in really stark contrast, I should say the day before yesterday stands in really stark contrast to yesterday. Yesterday, an FBI director was arraigned for making a false statement. The day before that, the Attorney General of the United States made arguably even falser statements. We'll see how the other case turns out. And she left the current FBI director completely exposed on his multiple false statements that his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case had been sealed by the department, was under court order not to be released, and had since been publicly released as a transcript. I don't know if this committee is going to take itself seriously enough to treat false statements to this committee as serious matters, irrespective of who made them. But the contrast is really stark. Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse leaned forward, his tone calm but sharp. He asked about a series of Treasury documents called suspicious activity reports, files that banks send when they detect potentially illegal financial transactions. There weren't just a few of them. There were hundreds connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Hundreds. Those reports were supposed to be gold mines for investigators. Paper trails that could show where the money came from, where it went, and who helped move it. But according to the senator, nothing was done with them. Not a single follow-up, not one investigation he could identify. That wasn't a clerical mistake. That was a red alarm, flashing bright, for anyone paying attention. And when Whitehouse asked the question that sent shockwaves through the room, whether any of those suspicious transactions had ever been examined, or if the FBI found what witnesses claimed Epstein once bragged about, everything changed. The silence that followed was louder than any answer could have been. Pam Bondi didn't pause long. She didn't answer, either. Instead, she went on the offensive. She accused the senator of bias, of slander, of taking donations from a man allegedly connected to Epstein himself. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about accountability anymore. It was about distraction. The questions were being buried under a pile of political mudslinging. And yet, the one thing that mattered most, the truth, never got its answer. But what Whitehouse was doing in that moment wasn't random. He wasn't chasing rumors. He was drawing a straight line between power, money, and the justice system's willingness to look away when the wrong names appear in the right places. He was trying to make sense of how a man like Epstein, whose crimes were known for years, managed to live like a king, move millions through banks, and keep the most powerful people in the world on speed dial. And when Bondi refused to say whether those financial reports were ever even reviewed, she wasn't just avoiding a question. She was exposing a pattern, the kind that has defined far too many political investigations. Because when the law stops at the edge of influence, justice becomes just another performance. Now, let's rewind. Those suspicious activity reports, called SARs, aren't gossip or speculation. They're official alerts sent to the Department of Justice whenever a bank detects something suspicious. Large transfers, hidden beneficiaries, offshore accounts that don't add up. They are, in essence, the starting point for some of the biggest criminal investigations in the country. And in Epstein's case, there weren't one or two of them. There were hundreds. Some involved shell companies. Others pointed to transactions through charities and accounts that existed only on paper. If the Department of Justice under Bondi ignored them, that's not just negligence. It's a systemic breakdown in how financial crimes are prosecuted when the people involved are wealthy, well-connected, or both. That's why Whitehouse's question hit like a punch. Because behind that mountain of paperwork could lie the missing puzzle pieces of how Epstein built his empire, and who helped keep it hidden. But Bondi's reaction told its own story. Instead of even acknowledging the SARs, she turned the hearing into a personal confrontation. She said, "You sit here and make salacious remarks when you're the one taking money from Epstein's closest confidants." It was a calculated move, turning the spotlight away from herself and throwing it at someone else. A political defense as old as politics itself. And yet, every second she spent attacking the questioner was another second she wasn't answering the question. The senator tried again. He asked, point blank, whether her department ever reviewed those documents, whether the FBI, under her leadership, investigated the suspicious financial activity tied to Epstein. Again, deflection. Accusations. No facts. But what made the exchange truly chilling was what came next. Whitehouse referenced public reporting that Epstein had shown people compromising photographs of a powerful public figure with young women. He asked a simple question. Were any such photographs ever found in the FBI's search of Epstein's properties? Now, let's be clear. No evidence has been released to confirm those photos exist. Witnesses have said they saw them. Reports have circulated, but nothing official has ever been made public. Still, the question mattered, not because of the rumor itself, but because of what it represented, whether law enforcement is even willing to look when the evidence might implicate someone untouchable. Bondi's response was swift and defensive. She accused Whitehouse of spreading salacious gossip, of trying to slander political figures. But she never said no. She never said yes, either. Just evasion. Just noise. And in that silence, something was revealed. When someone in power refuses to give a straight answer to a simple question, the issue isn't just what they're hiding. It's what they're protecting. That point. The hearing wasn't about one senator versus one official. It became a window into how deep the political protection racket goes. How certain investigations are slowed, softened, or stopped completely when the wrong names appear in the files. Because think about it. Epstein didn't move money through one or two accounts. He used entire networks, banks, lawyers, advisors, people who had to see the transfers, people who had to sign off. Those suspicious activity reports didn't write themselves. Dozens of bankers flagged those transactions. The system noticed. The system tried to alert the Department of Justice. And yet, years later, no one can say whether those alerts were ever investigated. That's not an oversight. That's selective blindness, and Bondi's reaction made that blindness look deliberate. Her repeated attacks on the senator weren't just emotional, they were strategic. The longer she argued about politics, the less time there was to talk about evidence. It's an old tactic. When the truth is uncomfortable, make it partisan. But here's where this story turns from political to personal. Because the Epstein case isn't just about one man's crimes. It's about power, who has it, who protects it, and who gets destroyed by it. It's about a justice system that too often seems to bend when the accused has connections, and that's exactly what Whitehouse was highlighting. He wasn't pushing conspiracy theories. He was demanding accountability. He wanted to know why the DOJ, an agency sworn to uphold the law, ignored hundreds of verified red flags. In that sense, this wasn't just about Epstein. It was about whether justice is still blind or if it's been blinded on purpose. Now, let's talk about those financial alerts for a moment, because they matter more than most people realize. Every year, thousands of suspicious activity reports are filed. They cover everything from drug trafficking to financial fraud. But only a fraction of them ever lead to investigations, and an even smaller number lead to charges. When those reports involve someone like Epstein, a man with friends in government, finance, and entertainment, the question becomes, did the system fail, or was it designed to? And when Bondi dismissed the senator's line of questioning as a slander, she wasn't just defending herself. She was defending the illusion that the Department of Justice always acts independently. But this hearing showed just how fragile that illusion has become. The most revealing part wasn't the shouting or the accusations. It was the silence. Because silence, in politics, is rarely empty. It's a signal, a message to anyone paying attention. After that exchange, the hearing shifted focus to another topic, threats against federal judges. But the energy in the room never recovered. Everyone knew the conversation had exposed something raw, a justice system struggling to police itself, and that's the real story here. Because this wasn't the first time the Department of Justice has been accused of double standards. Time and again, investigations touching powerful names seem to stall, get sealed, or vanish. Files that should see daylight end up buried in red tape or classified vaults. Meanwhile, the message to ordinary Americans is clear. Accountability is conditional, and that's dangerous. Because justice isn't supposed to be conditional. It's supposed to be consistent. The system can't claim to protect victims while protecting the powerful who exploit them. What Whitehouse did that day was attempt to pierce that shield of power, to force a conversation about why certain investigations never seem to reach their logical conclusion. And the way Bondi reacted, dodging, deflecting, counterattacking, spoke louder than any answer she could have given. Her deflections weren't strength. They were avoidance. They revealed a fear, not of the senator, but of what an honest answer might expose. And that's why this moment matters. Because it's not just about who said what in a hearing. It's about the larger pattern that keeps repeating. A pattern where truth becomes optional and accountability depends on the target. If these suspicious activity reports really do exist, and every indication says they do, then the question isn't whether they're real. It's why no one acted on them. Why hundreds of financial warnings tied to one of the most infamous criminals of the century were apparently ignored. Those reports could reveal where Epstein's money came from, who helped him move it, and possibly who benefited from it. And if those reports were buried, it means someone decided certain truths were too dangerous to uncover. This hearing should have been a turning point. a moment for clarity and transparency. Instead, it became a reflection of how power shields itself, and maybe that's the most unsettling part. Because when the people tasked with enforcing the law start treating questions like threats, democracy starts to crumble one unanswered question at a time. Every dodge, every silence, every accusation that replaces an answer, that's how accountability dies. Not with a bang, but with a shrug. And yet, there's a reason this exchange resonated far beyond that room. Because it gave Americans a glimpse of what happens behind the polished podiums and prepared statements. It showed what oversight looks like when it meets resistance, and what deflection looks like when the truth gets too close for comfort. It reminded people that justice doesn't fail overnight. It erodes slowly, through compromise, through selective blindness, through the quiet protection of the powerful. That's why it's crucial to keep watching moments like this. Because whether you agree with the senator or not, his questions matter. They force uncomfortable truths into the open. They remind those in power that someone is still paying attention. And as long as hearings like this keep happening, there's still a chance that the truth, however messy, will find its way out. Because in the end, this wasn't just about a confrontation in Congress. It was about a test of courage, of honesty, of integrity. And in that test, the silence spoke volumes. So if you care about transparency, about real justice, about holding power accountable, don't just watch. Stay engaged. Share the facts. Ask questions. Because democracy doesn't survive on trust alone. It survives on scrutiny. And in moments like this, when the truth feels buried under politics, it's your attention that keeps it alive. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and turn on notifications, because we're not done uncovering what's really happening behind the scenes of America's justice system. Every week, we dive deeper, connect the dots, and expose what others won't. Stay curious, stay informed, and remember, truth only stays hidden when we stop looking.